Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Property Buyer and Sellers Podcast. I'm Ken Hume and I'm your host, taking you through hints, tips and tricks, what's going on with the property market, and I hope you're doing well. It is the 24th of June 2024, and as I speak, we're gearing up for the last week before the election, and we're in the middle of the Euros. Now, first of all, just a headline that I saw today, which I thought was interesting from the Evening Standard, and that is first-time buyers are now paying an average of $227,000 for a home. It's not in London, of course, and more than 500,000 here in London. There you go, from Rightmove this is. They say someone newly getting onto the ladder will be paying around £400 a month more than they would have been paying 5 years ago. Obviously, this is a reflection on the general election timings. That's why they're mentioning 5 years ago. But it suggests the average mortgage payment has risen 61% since the last election, from £667 to £1,075 per calendar month. Obviously, there's various assumptions based around that, but it just goes to show how property prices have jumped in the last 5 years and how difficult it is for first-time buyers particularly. And one of the things that I always hear old people say, old people like myself, I should add, as far as property prices are concerned, is everyone says, well, in my day, we had 15% interest rates. And that's all true. But what the misses there, what the point that misses is this: property prices were so much lower that even at 15% interest rates, property prices were so much lower that it was still much more affordable than it is today for first-time buyers. And whatever the government gets in, they really do need to look at housing as a priority. I don't really see either government coming out with a policy which is going to help people, particularly first-time buyers, in any meaningful way. I've said for a long time that the one thing, the proposal that I would vote for, that no one's coming out for, is to put a housing minister in place that's actually cross-party. So rather than an actual minister that's elected for a 5-year term, we need someone that's going to be there for 10 years, has cross-party support, and understands the nuances of what is a very complex housing market here in the UK. And no one's really got to grips with it. And if you look at what governments do successively, and particularly the Conservative government, they put a new housing minister in post about every year. That's ridiculous, isn't it? So somebody comes along, frankly, nobody can get to grips with the UK housing market in a year. And I recall a certain circumstance where one of those ministers actually approached a developer that I know and asked them if they could walk around a building site because they'd, and I quote, never been on one. And this is a person that's in charge of housing in the UK. It's absolutely ridiculous. We need people that have relevant experience and qualification, but we also need people that are not there for party political gain. We need people that are going to look at this on the long term. And I've actually heard ministers say that certain longer term strategies they wouldn't put into play because it might benefit the other side. That's terrible to hear that it's not always about the interests of the country. These politicians will put their own political futures ahead of everything else. And that's selfish, but it is what it is. I'm not saying all politicians are selfish. There are some very good ones out there. But I am suggesting that we need to get hold of things as far as the housing market is concerned in so many different ways. It's currently controlled by about 10 major developers, and they build what they want, where they want. And the government will try and control them and curb them. But frankly, that's the only way the government are getting houses built. The government are under a mandate to get more houses built, whichever party you vote for. It doesn't really change. So enough of a rant there. As far as the election's concerned, I honestly don't see much between the parties. We already know that as far as the Renters Reform Act is concerned, both parties will bring it forward eventually. The Labour government have promised to do so sooner, but the Tories have also said that they will put that on the agenda once more, and the Renters Reform Act will come. And it's not the end of the world in its current form. Will it get more draconian under a Labour government is something I hear asked often. And the answer is possibly. We'll have to wait and see for the fine detail. But it will be a while before that gets back on the agenda. They're saying they're going to make it a priority. I have a feeling they're going to have a lot of priorities once they get in, but we'll see, and things will change a bit. You do wonder what they're talking about behind closed doors, not just the election rhetoric, but time will tell. Now, as far as the market's concerned, there's been a bit of a pickup, I'm pleased to report. Here in southwest London, there are more buyers out there making buying decisions. There's a bit more confidence out there. And I think estate agents are looking into this too deeply. I hear a lot of agents saying, oh, we're turning the corner. It's this, it's that, it's the other. Frankly, it's one thing. That is, for the first time in a long time, the weather has brightened up. And when the weather brightens up, things start to get busier. 'Twas ever thus. Always is the case. When you get better weather, people start to look. And guess what's going to happen in July, August? It will drop off a little bit while families go away, have their holidays, rather than make offers on houses and put their houses on the market. Always the way. And it will pick up again in September. As far as interest rates are concerned, well, the latest MPC meeting this month, That's the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. They chose to put the rates on hold as opposed to cutting them, and yet inflation is on target for the first time in its 2% range. Now, bear in mind, the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee are not politicians, and they don't want to be associated with politicians. The point is that independence stands them in good stead to make decisions outside of party politics. So inflation's on target. We were led to understand that when inflation was within target range, we could start to see interest rates easing. Why haven't they eased? Well, I believe this is political, but in a kind of reverse way. What it is this. The Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, if they cut rates now, would look like they were siding with a Conservative government, and Rishi would no doubt jump up and say, look what we've done, interest rates are falling, we told you they'd fall, and we're the ones that made it happen. And frankly, the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee don't want that on their conscience or anything else. They don't want to be seen as party political. And I actually think that we will see a rate cut, but we'll see it in August. That's my gut feeling. You can't be sure about these things because it does depend on where inflation is at the time. But I suspect we'll see a cut in August. I think that cut will be 0.25 basis points. Will that make a massive difference? What it will do, it won't make a massive difference to payments because payments are based on swap rates anyway, and swap rates are already anticipating a cut in the base rate. And that will come through, I think. But what it will do is signal a direction of travel. And that direction of travel being downwards will instill a bit of confidence in people going forwards. I think these days people are resigned to the fact that whether Labour or Conservative government get in, it's business as usual as far as their day-to-day lives are concerned. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to see an interest rate cut in August. It will be a slight cut, but it will give enough confidence to spur the market on for what I call the mums market in September, when the kids are back at school and mum's out there hunting. So I suspect better news for the UK housing market this year. It's not going to fly. We're not going to see it flying off the handles or anything like that. My gut feeling is that we'll see some more transaction levels and some more people moving. But the September window is a very short one. Why? Because guess what? The weather gets naff here very quickly. And come middle of October, certainly by November, it's going to be cold and dark. And people are more looking forward to Christmas and the new year before they start doing anything. What I mean by that is people find Christmas or the end of the year a real defining point, and they want to either be in somewhere by Christmas or they don't want to do the deal until next year and then look at targeting perhaps the springtime. So for that reason, I suspect we're looking at a very strong September market, and it's a short window. So if you're thinking of selling your home, I actually think that September could prove quite a successful window for you. But if you haven't sold by mid-October, I always say it's time to consider whether you should still be on the market for the rest of the year. Because remember, nobody wants what nobody wants. If your house is on the market for too long, then that is a bad reflection on it, and it looks like there's something wrong with it. And these days, with overvaluation being as rife as it is, especially with the big corporates, then you can find yourself in a very tricky position very quickly. And these days, there's a tool that you can actually add to your browser. And a good little tip for you here, Property File. Add it to your Chrome browser. And what it will do is when you go into Rightmove, it will show you the date of the last price drop of the property you're looking at, if the price has dropped at all, and when it came to market. This can be really useful and telling to show you whether a property is at the correct level, whether it's been slowly dropping. And when people see a house that's come down in price again and again and again, as is very visible if you use Property File or other resources, then people lose confidence in it. They think, well, why has that dropped so much? You know, what's wrong with it? Why don't people want it? And therefore, they avoid it. And very quickly now, when people are looking through browsings on their phones, as they do during their work breaks and often during their work, they're flicking past the same range of properties every day. And that same range, as they're flicking through, they see your house come up, but they saw it yesterday and the day before and the day before. How many days is it, given that they'll look at those properties probably 2-3 times a day? How many days before they're bored looking at it and they're just discounting it by looking at the front shot? That's what you've got to ask yourself. So don't be hanging on at too high a price point for too long. If it's not working, it doesn't work within a reasonable time frame. Specifically, I'm talking now about the September market. You should think about whipping it off by mid-October, latest the end of October, and then think about marketing next year, unless it's desperately urgent that you sell. And there are other alternatives as well, such as auction, which we've covered in earlier editions. Now, I want to tell you a little story about lettings now. If you're a landlord, or if you think of being a landlord, you need to hear this one. So we had a property come on the market, and it's a beautiful house, been extended beautifully, the usual bifold doors, island kitchen, and the garden was level with the outside. So you had the outside garden completely level with the patio doors, so that it really did feel like the garden was coming into the house. Beautifully done, and frankly stunning. A client at the time asked us what we thought the value was. I think the value at the time was £2,000 per calendar month, and we put it on the market. I get a call from the landlord a week later. We've set up some viewings and not yet got it away. And he says, Ken, take it off the market. I said, why is that? He said, because I found a private buyer. I said, okay, fine. Good luck to you. You sure they've checked out? Everything's all right? He said, yeah, fine. And they're paying a lot more. So at this point, I'm suspicious because this is the market level. So even though it's a beautiful house, we're already asking top money. He said, yeah, they're paying £2,500 per calendar month and they're giving me 7 months in advance, 7 months rent in advance in cash. So I said, well, firstly, whenever people are offering you rent in advance in cash, why? Why would they do that? What is it that's so wrong with them that they feel the need to do this? That's the first trigger of suspicion. And the second thing is making sure that you reference these people. But anyway, we'll come back to that later. So anyway, he takes the money, moves them in. About 3 months later, I get a call. Ken, can you come back round? I said, I thought you'd rented the property out. He said, I had, but you need to come and see this. So I went back round and the house was absolutely trashed like I've never seen a house trashed before. And what had happened is it'd been turned into a drug farm. And these drug farms, imagine little troughs suspended by chains from the ceiling at varying levels, and then lights illuminating over the top of them, and then hydroponics, water, all supplying them via pumps from various sources all around the house in every single room. It was absolutely an engineering marvel, frankly, in a way, but quite shocking how professional it was. And the neighbors had apparently said that everything was quiet in there. The curtains were drawn. People came and went, but very quietly, usually during the day, and then went away again. And the neighbors thought they were just away a lot. But what happened was the police were up because they were searching for somebody that was running along around those roads that they were pursuing. And this house lit up like a Christmas tree. Because of all those lights, the thermal imaging camera that the helicopter was using actually picked up the house as an issue, reported it back to base, and then base went around there and actually smashed the door down, went in, had a look around, located the landlord and explained to them what happened. And the moral of the story is, if somebody is offering you cash and says, don't worry about the money, you should worry about the money. And if somebody's offering you more than your property is worth on the rental market, you have to ask yourself, who would do that? Because anyone who is getting that money from their hard-earned salary is not going to be doing that. They're going to be trying to do a deal with you. I often say, if people are trying to do a deal, that's understandable. It's their hard-earned. If they're going to make a lower offer, then it might be that we politely decline. It might not, depending on the circumstances. But certainly, somebody that's offering well over the price that we're quoting would and should rightly raise suspicion. So be very careful out there, folks. When you're looking at rentals, make sure you do the proper checks and go with an agent that is going to have a really thorough due diligence process. And that's why we don't get that many arrears here. And when we do, we have other ways of protecting our landlords, which we can discuss at another time. But right now, the key message is, when you rent out your property, make sure you rent it out to those that you assume you're renting it to, and don't take a risk, because it's just not worth it. And the refurb costs in that case, by the way, were £45,000 because there were holes in the ceiling, the electricity had been tapped, and so on and so forth. Everything was absolutely ruined. It's really quite shocking. And the other thing to say about rentals is, if you have a tenant in and they stop paying, because the courts are very busy, you will find that it will take you, well, here in Croydon, up to a year, possibly even longer, just to get a court date. And then when you've got that court date, it's then a case of waiting for the bailiffs after the expiry of the court order, assuming you've got all the paperwork right. And at the moment, we've got a couple of those which are waiting for bailiffs, and they have taken so far 3 months, and we're still waiting for the bailiffs to come around. And what happens is, just to be clear for those of you that don't know, if you evict your tenant and the judge orders possession, the next thing that happens is, usually it's 14 days. They give the tenant 14 days to vacate. If the tenant doesn't leave in that 14 days, you then apply to the court bailiffs. And you have to use court bailiffs. You can't use private ones. And in that instance, it's about how busy those bailiffs are to get an appointment to get the tenant out. And the tenant has a legal right to remain until the bailiffs come, until that date comes. And then you attend with the bailiff on the day and a locksmith. And then you go in, change the locks, and the tenants at that point have to leave. But it's a really traumatic process, and you can lose a lot of money because rents are so high, especially here in London. Can you imagine going for the sort of periods we're talking about without rent? There are ways we protect you against that as well. That's a discussion for another day. But certainly the key message here is a very simple one. Be really, really careful about tenant selection. And if you're not sure, your gut feelings 50-50, then err on the side of caution, move on and find someone who you are more positive about, because any good tenants should give you a kind of gut feeling. And that's the thing that we use a lot. Not just gut feeling, but it starts with gut feeling. If the gut feeling's right, people seem nice, then it's referencing due diligence, making sure they are who they say they are, and they've got a good credit score. Because if they haven't got a good credit score, we have to assume then that they may have defaulted on a rent somewhere else. And that is a problem. So it's really difficult for people with a poor credit score. And it's one to mention to your children as well. Those of you that got children at uni age, make sure they're really careful of their debt situation regarding mobile phones and the like, because it's so easy to end up with bad credit. And when you've got bad credit, it's a vicious circle. So be careful out there, folks. Apart from that, the sun is out. We're expecting a good week this week for reasons already explained. And then it will start to tail off for the summer holidays. As far as the market's concerned, as I say, last week, more offers than we've had for a number of weeks, actually, and things are starting to move again. That's really positive. I suspect, as I say, it will continue, especially with the looking forward to that August interest rate cut, hopefully. I could be wrong here, but I think August is the next cut. Well, it can't be before then, because the next Monetary Policy Committee meeting is in August. And when it happens, we'll report it to you here and now. As far as who you should vote for, I'm not going to tell you that. I wouldn't dream of it. But what I would say is that in terms of property, there's really not that much to choose between the two. It's quite likely that the Labour government could be more draconian as far as landlords are concerned, because there seems to be a whole jealousy around landlords, as many of you will know. We've talked about this before. And I do think that the Conservative government haven't been any better anyway. If you look at what they did with Section 24 and paying the lack of being able to offset interest rates against tax. So that's it for this week. Hope you have a great week. We'll be back soon with another edition. Till then, look after yourselves and your families. Ciao.